Why do poorer people usually have the highest number of children? Can't speak for other countries, but here in Bangladesh, poorer families in rural areas opt for more children intentionally. Their logic is that if they have more children, their family has more members who can engage in income-generating activities, like parents encouraging kids to drop out of primary school to go work for brick kilns, rural stores, etc. is fairly common. Sadly, child labor runs rampant among lower income groups, and the relevant laws about this are hardly enforced. One interesting reason I've heard young people who expect to move up in their careers wait to have kids till they're more stable, can afford it. But if you are broke and have no expectation of ever getting better jobs or ever being less broke, so a generational poverty situation, there's no reason to wait if you feel like you ever want kids. It's not like tomorrow is going to be any better financially. We have a religious, traditional saying where I live, somewhere in the Middle East, that goes, when the baby comes, with it comes its blessing, meaning the money required to provide a good living. I have a story to elaborate on that. I'd been in a taxi today going to work. The car was a really old and beat-up Lada, and the driver looked really poor and miserable. Along the way he picked up a couple that seemed to be his friends, and they started chatting about their kids and how poor are they as parents. Then after a sad pause they proceeded to repeat that old saying, "Sex is free." Often poverty is correlated with less access to education and services. Also, religious dogma has an impact. Also, having tons of kids can make you poorer, so it is sometimes a chicken and egg situation. Less education about birth control. Less access to doctors' clinics for family planning. Birth control prescriptions. Discussions of IUDs. Due to costs involved, some also view kids as income sources, from child tax credits, child support, etc. Out here girls are still often taught their whole life purpose is to be a wife and mother, and the rite of passage is 15. There are a lot of reasons, and not all of them apply to every person. Sometimes it's that they couldn't afford to keep up with birth control. Depending on where you live, especially in red states, free, affordable birth control is very difficult to get, and if you don't have insurance you tend to have a harder time. Sometimes it's that the pregnancy was unplanned, so getting a better paying job that would require a specialized education or training is harder to do. Sometimes they're in abusive relationships and are coerced into having more children because it's much harder to leave an abusive partner when you have even one child, much less more than one. Sometimes people who are in poverty have serious depression issues, and when you're not doing well, you might think having a child will bring you unconditional love and make you feel better. Not a good idea, of course. But people who are depressed aren't always thinking the clearest. Sometimes it's what their family did and they see it as the thing to do. There are loads more reasons. But I do want to point out that it's usually a lot more complicated than poor people are stupid and don't know unprotected sex gets you pregnant, or poor people have tons of kids for the welfare. The former is pretty unfair. Being poor and even uneducated doesn't mean you're an idiot. And the latter does happen, but not nearly as often as people say. Edit. Plus, pure and simple, most people want kids, and if poor people waited until things were financially perfect to do it, they'd often never be able to. I don't want kids, but it's a natural thing to. Having babies when you were young and poor was typical back in the day. Women in the workforce changed a lot of that. A woman trying to have a career does not need the extra hassles of arranging sitters, etc. for more than 2 or 3 kids. So they stop having babies and continue on with their choice of employment. More conservative people may prefer to keep the wife at home with the kids, and since she is there doing that, what's one more? So they are surviving on a single income. If the husband loses his job or they have sudden large expenses, they are in trouble. Anyone else noticed this question on Rise Again? The belief that more children, more hands, and thus more income, coupled with the factors such as lack of awareness, contraception-related issues at all. Economically, sex is free, and healthcare, contraception is not. Poor people are less likely to have easy access to contraceptives, but just as likely as anyone to have access to sex. Take that and average it out along a whole population and you'll have more instances of unprotected sex. Culturally, it's complicated. For some cultures, it's the norm for a person to want a large family. If those same cultures happen to occupy a poorer class in some areas, that can give the image that poor people in general have more children. For some people, a family could also be the one positive thing they feel is within their reach. For others, it could be a hope thing. You can't hope it will be better for your kids one day if you never have kids. I'd also like to caution you in considering these birth rates to be irresponsible in some way. It's fine to note trends and contributing factors. But going into the weeds or shouldn't these people be having this many children, is a slippery slope into discussing whether they should be having children at all. Once you get there, you're discussing eugenics. Lack of good sex education. They are from cultures that value families first. Social pressure. All their friends are having kids and their parents and relatives constantly bombard them with, "When are you going to have kids?" Fear of being seen as the weird one or fearing questions about their sexuality often comes into play. Some people really fear being seen as the odd one out, worried that if they wait too long, it'll be too late. A big one is no reason to put off or avoid having kids. They aren't planning to go to graduate school or vying for a top-level career. If they do have career plans, then having a child isn't necessarily going to interfere with that. Or in some cases, like politics, it might help. Or they aren't career-oriented and family is their top priority. Low self-esteem or emotional immaturity. If their upbringing involves abuse or neglect, they may decide they want to get married and have kids right away to provide themselves with the love they have yearned for their entire lives. Sadly, sometimes this is before they realize they aren't emotionally or psychologically ready to have kids. In the same vein, desperation to get their adult lives started. Edit. Expounding on the last item. It's not always just childish impatience as I might have conveyed. Richer people in relative comfort can afford to wait because they see it as a promise that will eventually be delivered. For poorer people, waiting is often a sacrifice with no end in sight. They get sick of being told to wait. And in some matters that they can help, like getting married and starting a family, they decide they've been waiting long enough and it's not going to get majorly better in the future. So why not have kids now? Condoms and abortions cost money. Sex ed is only taught properly in higher income schools. Poorer regions intentionally teach abstinence-only sex ed. Poorer equals lack of high-paying job, salary equals lack of higher education equals less knowledge about sex education, birth control, less money for doctors. Psychological reasons. Sex is one of the few joys that the poor can experience. Contraception costs money that they don't have, either directly, i.e. having to pay for contraceptives, or indirectly, i.e. having to make time and spend money to travel to places where they give away condoms, and dealing with the assholes outside the Planned Parenthood. Financial reasons. Spawning is incentivized in the U.S. Thresholds for government support are higher the more members of a household there are. Tax credits, WIC, food stamps, Section 8, etc., are all easier to get and more generous if you have a horde of children. Even without those, having 15 people to spread the costs and efforts needed to maintain a household across makes existence much more viable. Having 15 incomes to draw from as the kids enter the job market means when the parents are broken and no longer able to support themselves, the chances of the parents getting support from at least some of the kids is higher. Societal reasons. Again, in the U.S., social mores are largely dictated by the pseudo-Christian majority, and a disproportionate number of the poor have been indoctrinated into that group. Their "be fruitful and multiply" mandate is drilled home from an early age, and they are kept from experiencing opposing that doctrine until it is deeply entwined with their personal identity. There are others as well, but those are the ones I can think of off the top of my head. Poor access to family planning in Florida has a lot of immigrants from places like Haiti, Cuba, etc., which are predominantly Catholic counties, so they kind of frown on birth control. Being poor affects impulsivity, which leads to poorer choices. Many poor people will make the most immediately gratifying choice, e.g., sex without a condom, or the easy choice rather than the sensible one. This makes sense because if your daily life is one in which you have little to bring you joy, and if you're in state of high stress, you will grab what pleasure you can when it comes. https www.appa.org/news/press/releases/2014/08/growing-up-poor. I grew up poor, and there was also an economic issue. Poor people get food stamps and economic support per child. I actually had a cousin who married a woman who, as her kids got older, asserted that it was time to have another child to keep the entitlements coming. I know this is the typical welfare queen stereotype, which I don't embrace, but I did have white relatives who kept having kids to get money. Another one of my cousins has made it her mission to take in each of her grandchildren under her care so she can collect Social Security for them, is supposedly abandoned by their parents. They sort of are left to her because her kids haven't turned out to be the most productive people by a long stretch, but she asked to have them live with her for the money. There is also the issue of feeling that you're loved and valued in a world which has put you in a box which says you have no value. If you don't work or can't work, you can be a parent and hold a role which is socially valued. There may also be some sense of security that having more people around when your life is one disaster away from total collapse. The cycle of poverty explains it. When you live out of the mindset of lack, your brain functions on a different level than a brain functioning on abundance. That means your decision is off point. You may be more vulnerable to rape, and have less access to contraception and abortion. The fear of, I am missing blank, quote, higher risk of pregnancy, and lower access to getting rid of pregnancy, means you end up having more kids. Alternatively, that's a power structure. Young women are often married off young after being brainwashed into believing their only value is being a breeding pet. They also usually don't make it to university, so education and sheltered childhood certainly play a part. It's not about income. It's about woman education. Even in poorer families, the more educated the women are, less child they have, since they know how to prevent unwanted pregnancies.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epicaricast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.